Well, welcome back to Harmonize Your Life, conversations on self-care for women of color with your host, Dr. Toni G. Alvarado. We'll be right back. We're still in the month of March. It's still Women's History Month, and we still have more stories to share. We are sharing our stories of self-care and wholeness. We are owning our stories as women of color. We have unique and a unique approach. We have unique experiences that come along with being women of color, not only globally, but certainly in this country, in the United States, where we are based from. And so we're owning our stories because we have stories of resilience. We have stories where we have and testimonies of overcoming sometimes insurmountable odds. And so we want to encourage you as we share our stories this year. I was just listening a few minutes ago to a live discussion on Facebook with Reverend Dr. Renita Weem, and she talked about retrieving women's stories. And not only do we have to go back and retrieve stories from the Bible and in antiquity and history, but we have real life stories today of women that are walking with us every day that have stories to share. And so we're going to share our stories this month as women of color so that we can encourage you to own your story and share your story. And hopefully by you sharing your story and listening to our stories, we can all be blessed. We'll be right back with our guest for this week. So, I'm real excited, right? I'm real excited because I have one of my favorite women in the whole world here with me today. My sister, my friend, my colleague. And it seems like in this last year, we have become really, really girlfriends. You have some people who are your colleagues with and your sisters with, but then you can cross over into another level of connection or intimacy one with the other and sharing life with one another. And it's interesting because we normally see each other throughout the year at women's conferences. And because of COVID, we've not seen each other. But it seems like the Lord has done something in our relationship this year that has caused us to walk together even at a closer level. And I want you to help me welcome to the studio, to the Harmonize Your Life podcast studio, Reverend Dr. Jeanne Porter-King. Welcome, Dr. Jeanne.
It is so great to be with you, Dr. Toni. Thank you for inviting me on your podcast.
Well, I know you probably don't need an introduction, but I do want to just share a little bit for those who do not know you. The Reverend Dr. Jeanne Porter-King is an author. She is a consultant. She's an inspirational speaker. She is a preacher, and she specializes in developing women leaders. She is the founder and president of Transporter Group. And Dr. Jeanne has trained, coached, and mentored leaders in corporate, community, and faith-based organizations. Through Transporter, she provides tools and resources to move people, and particularly women, and systems to a higher level of effectiveness. I'm holding in my hand right now her latest book, Influence Starts with I. And if you do not have this book, I want you to go get it. We are using this book in our work with My Sister's Keeper Foundation for Women. We started using it last year in our leadership and life coaching program, and we're using it again this year. And I want you to know it will be a blessing. It says, Influence Starts with I, a woman's guide for unleashing the power of leading from within and effecting change around you. And so if you do not have her book, I want you to go get it. You can go to her website and we'll share all that information and how you can find her in just as we progress through our conversation, and certainly before we're done on today. But I want you to know she has so many books, and she's an author, and she has written and co-written a whole lot of articles, and she's just phenomenal. Okay. She's just phenomenal. And I love her. And what's interesting about my relationship with Dr. Jeanne is that I was actually actually introduced to her through one of her books, Leading Ladies. I was introduced to her book on biblical images for women and women in leadership. And that book, I ran across that book when I was teaching in one of our local Bible colleges, and I was teaching on gender differences in leadership. I was introduced to her book. We used that book in the class. And then little did I know that our paths would cross at women's conferences around the country, particularly at the Reverend Dr. Elaine Flake's Women's Conference at the Greater Allen Cathedral. We connected there. And so then over the years, we would see one another. We would always connect. And you know how you meet someone and you see them maybe on a stage. And I have to say that some people that you see on the stage, when you get up close, you wish you would have left them on the stage. But she's not that kind of sister, okay? She is a real sister. She's down to earth. She's a scholar. She's a practitioner. And most of all, she is a real woman. She's a wife. Amen. She is a wife. She is a daughter, caring. She's a caregiver now, caring for her mother. We're going to talk a little bit about some of that today. And she is a sister. She's like me, oldest sister. And so she's passionate about family, passionate about relationships, and particularly relationships with other women. I am so delighted to have my sister and my friend in the podcast studio with me today in the person of Dr. Jeanne Porter-King. Jeanne, thank you for doing this with me today.
Dr. Toni, thank you. You have noted that in the last year, in COVID conditions, we have drawn closer. And I believe it's the timing of God.
Yeah.
We really connected last year, or maybe the end of the year before, on writing on some articles for this book we hope will come out eventually.
Yes. And thank you, Jeanne. Dr. Jeanne invited me into a writing project. And I have to tell you, Jeanne, when you invited me into that project, it really boosted my confidence because I've not felt as confident about my writing. Even though I've written some books, self-published, and of course I've written a dissertation and a thesis and all of that. But you're just always wondering, is this good enough? And am I doing this right? And so for you to invite me into that writing project, you don't know what you did for me.
Well, amen. You know what? We're supposed to do that for one another. But your story and your My Sister Keepers Foundation, your mentoring program, you went and became a coach and then developed tools for other women to not just coach other women. I have now met so many graduates of your program, the panel we do weekly for women, and most of them support you there, but they're able to say, I'm a coach now. And you have literally equipped women in ways that that story and that process needed to be shared. This is a book for church leaders on how we empower women more effectively, published by CBE International. Yeah, they needed to hear your story. So I can't wait for it to come out.
I can't wait either. Thank you. What do you mind if we just go with Toni and Jeanne today?
I'm good with that. I meant to say that also. I'm good. I know what the labels say.
I know, but they see our names. They know we have doctorates. But Jeanne, let's talk. This is Women's History Month.
Yes.
And one of your books, I mentioned that I was on a live earlier today. I wasn't on it actually while it was happening, but I saw a live that Dr. Renita Weems did.
Oh, I'd love to see that. Maybe you send me.
Yeah, I think it's on Facebook, and I actually was watching it, and I was like, oh my goodness! And I even put in the comments, oh, I wish I could have watched this live while she was doing it. But it came up in my stream, and I watched it, and of course, we love Dr. Renita Weems.
Yes.
She is just one of the greatest minds. And a womanist theologian that we know. So she was talking about her book, Just a Sister Away. And I mentioned your book, Leading Ladies, right? And so with this being Women's History Month and the work that you've done as it relates to uncovering the stories of women, right? Mm-hmm. And Dr. Ream said today that we need to retrieve the stories of women. Yeah. And that really encouraged me, because one of the things that I wanted to do this month for Women's History Month was dedicate this month to retrieving our stories. We have a story to tell as women of color, as it relates to self-care, as it relates to wholeness, health, and wellness. And our story needs to be told. Our story needs to be heralded in our community. And we need to encourage other women in our community to tell their story, because we have stories of resilience.
Yes.
We have stories of faith. Yeah. We have, all of those things. And now those things are part of our wholeness journey, our self-care journey. And so I've been on this journey for a while. And I know you have too. And so I just want to start out by you just sharing a little bit of your journey and your story as it relates to self-care, wholeness, or whatever you want to say to us along this issue topic.
Thank you. I've been reflecting a lot, even on that journey, and about where would I officially say it started. And there's probably a formal place where I became more intentional and conscious of creating certain practices and principles in my life. But as I was reflecting this morning on preparing to talk with you, I have to admit, it actually started in my teen years with messages from my mother. My mother has always struggled with weight. She was diagnosed with diabetes at age in her 40s, and she'll be 90 this year. So we're talking about living with diabetes for almost 50 years. And before my father died, after he retired, she and he started walking together. Her weight came down a bit. She was still a plump, but these days, health is what was important, and she was healthy. And when my father passed and one of her sister's husband passed around the same time, they came to live together back where I'm from, Ohio and Pennsylvania. And her weight shot up again, and to probably larger than she'd ever been. And what I hear and have heard often from her, she did not want her daughters. My sister is 10 years younger than me. And she always put in us, don't let your weight go up. Be careful with this. You don't want diabetes. And so I had to really think about that, though there's a more intentional start, at a certain phase in my life. But as I reflect on it, I've always been conscious of certain things because she was so concerned that she never wanted her daughters to have to live through the chronic issue of diabetes and then the compounding of weight and then other issues that come with it. And so I've come full circle that she now lives with me. We've moved her from Pennsylvania and Ohio into, the Chicago area with my husband and I. And so I thought I really need to give kind of thanks and honor for Mom for her early messages, and then seeing it come full circle that part of my self-care now includes care for her.
Okay. And that's interesting. You talked about this month, my blog posts. I always do, once a month I do a blog that goes along with my whole self-care message, right? And so this month, my blog post that'll be out this in a few days, my title is "My Story Begins with My Mother's Story."
Yeah, I haven't seen that, obviously.
Yeah. So it'll be out in a day or so. I just finished it last night. Yes. Right. I sat up late last night. I'm caring for Mom right now. Yeah. Mom is on hospice care. So last night I sat up and I wrote a tribute to her. Yeah. And it's entitled "My Story Begins with My Mother's Story." Yeah. And it really came from I gave credit in the because scholars, we have to give credit where credit is due, right? And so but the thought came from a talk that I attended years ago down at the ITC Inter-Theological Denominational Seminary here in Center here in Atlanta. I was in a talk with Dr. Consuela Ward, and she's written a book on healing Black girl pain. Right. And I went to that particular talk down there. And she made a statement that our stories begin with our mother's story. And that statement has always stayed with me. I mean, I think I might have been about 5 or 6, maybe longer years ago that I went to this talk. But for some reason, and it wasn't in the book that she was promoting, but she just made the statement kind of in her introductory comments. But something about that just stuck with me. And I've always use that kind of term, especially as it relates to my own mother and my mother's journey. And so last night I wrote about that, and I talked about my story and my mother's story, and particularly her story and how that's impacted my story. And so to hear that, when you say that it really started with your mother, even though there was a place where you became more intentional, it really started with your mother, right? And so I want to just say kudos to your mother, and how important is that for us as mothers?
Yeah.
And now, what kind of role modeling should we be doing with our daughters and in our community? Because, for us in the African-American community, our mothers are important to our community.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And my mother would say her story started with her mother. To this day, she still talks about her mother. But her mother came to live with us when I was 11 years. Well, I was probably 10 years old. And so my mother cared for her mother. She said my grandmother had a stroke, and in the rehab center, I just found this out when Mom came to live with me. Granny kept walking away, and they'd have to go back and get her. She'd somehow get out of the nursing home where she was in rehab. And my father said, go get your mother, and she's living with us. And in the period we were in, from a working class family in Western Pennsylvania, my father ended up gravitating into leadership and therefore in a little more affluence. But where we were in a little 2-bedroom apartment. When my grandmother had her stroke, she was raising 3 of her grandchildren. So one of the grandsons came to live with us, my brother and I. My sister was probably all of 9 months old.
Wow.
And Daddy said, bring her. He jumped in the gear. Promotions had happened just at the right time. God's hand, bought our first home.
Wow.
And he lived with us it had to have been about 2 years before she passed. And so that was a model. So when it came time for us to decide about Mom, I said, Mom, you model for us how to care for a mother. You model for us.
Yeah.
And
I'm telling you, and it's so important. I told my mother last night, because my mother's a nurse, and she had a 30-year nursing career. And of course, now that she's not able to care for herself, we're caring for her, my sisters and I. And I said to Mom last night, I said, Mom, you took care of everybody. My mom is the one in our family that everybody went to when they're sick, right? Yeah. My mom, and it's interesting, her middle name is Jeanne. So Margaret Jeanne. And but in our family, she's Aunt Jeanne, right?
Yeah.
And so everybody in our family, if you cut your finger, you call her Aunt Jeanne, because she's the nurse in the family, and everybody's going to find out from her what should I do. And you know what I'm saying? And so I told her, I said, you've been a caregiver for everyone. Now let us care for you. And you certainly, if you haven't cared for anyone, you certainly care for me and my sisters, your daughters. So now it's our turn to turn around and care for you. So that's, this whole idea of our history.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And in our community, we don't do so well with putting our elderly in homes and things of that nature. We tend to want to care for our elderly or our parents, our my husband, my brother-in-law, my mother-in-law is in his home now. Yeah. We had to move her out of her home at 83, and now she's with my brother-in-law, and my husband Bishop is going back and forth from Atlanta to Columbus, Ohio, a couple of times a month.
Yeah.
Literally driving since COVID, right?
Yes.
To take care of Mom. And so in our culture, we bring them home.
You're right. You're right. She stayed with my brother for like 6 weeks while we were getting things ready here. And at some point, my brother's very logical, but he totally agrees with you and, doing things that's similar to your husband. But at one point he said, well, Jeanne, if it ever gets too much or if her care needs get too much, we have to. I said, I can't even think about that. I can't even imagine. It is a lot that she has that's in her care, but it's such a delight. The humor, she's resilient. She models for me strength. 2 weeks.
Oh my God. The humor.
Yeah. Within 2 weeks of coming with us, she fell Well, we got her to the emergency room, and the doctor calls us because of COVID. We couldn't wait in the emergency room. We went outside. He calls and said, it's serendipity that your mother fell because her potassium levels are so high that we usually see people in heaven, having gone to heaven with this. She was in kidney failure. We didn't know it. The fail, when he said serendipity, I said, oh, we call that the grace of God. And so, yeah, being in there, when many seniors are hospitalized, she began to have all of these just mental issues. Thought she was seeing her mother. Ended up in rehab. They got her together. But when she came home, just the care needs were extensive. She couldn't walk. To see my mother, who's walking stairs now, getting to the bathroom and everything on her own.
Praise God.
Lord,
praise God.
Praise God, as well as it's a model for me of the strength that is in our mothers. My mother,
and I can so relate. Mom. This is not a road we would have chosen for Mom in terms of, where we are. We brought her home on hospice care.
Yeah.
But what they told us coming into it was, just because she's on hospice doesn't mean that she's dying. Right. It just means that she needs another level of care. And if this is the end of her life, then we're going to make sure she goes out with pain-free and with comfort care. Yes. But since Mom's been home these last couple of days, I mean, the laughs, the funny stuff that's happened, the joy, and the bond that's taking place with me and my sisters, and the bond that's happening with us, and I'm just kissing her all the time and loving on her all the time. And my mother was never really a real touchy-feely kind of person, but now she's like this little child that just lets you hug her and kiss her and all this other kind of stuff. And my sister said, I've never kissed Mom this much in my life. It's just a blessing that that we can find joy even in the midst of it. This is part of our story. This is part of our journey of self-care, our journey of wholeness, that whole communal, if you will, kind of experience that we're having even with our mothers. But Jeanne, you said
before you go on, you said something that your mother is only about a decade younger than mine, but there are women of the generation that they took care of business. And you said that, you didn't kiss your mother as much now as you are now. I'm doing the same thing. Whenever I do, my mother almost giggles when I kind of caress her and kiss her, or I move up her blanket that she might have on at night.
Yes.
And it dawns on me that we come from Black women who were taught to be strong. They got it from their mother. Yes. And you talk about self-care. I don't think that they did what they had to do to raise us.
Yes.
And it is a pleasure. It's a joy. It's a service. It's a ministry for us to care for them now. But it's also a reminder of a lesson why we've got to care for ourselves, because they weren't able to do it for themselves. And they almost are embarrassed and giggling. And like you said, a child, to see us doing it for them now.
Yeah, it is. And you know what? They didn't have that language, self-care. They didn't have that language and maybe even some of the knowledge. But at the same time, in a lot of ways, they lived better than we did. Because they did rest more than, you know what I'm saying? They knew how to take breaks a lot of times. You know what I'm saying? You didn't work on Sunday when they were coming up. You didn't do that. You got your clothes together on Saturday. You wasn't taking out the ironing board. You wasn't washing it. You wasn't mopping the floor. You wouldn't do it. But now everything is 24/7. We wash it on Sunday. We're doing everything. We're not taking those breaks. They knew how to do that. They didn't have some of the stressors that we have. Of course, they had the stressors of their generation.
Yes, right.
But you know what I'm saying? But yet they taught us resilience. They taught us the love for community. They taught us love for the family.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? They taught us how to take care of one another. And if for no other reason, we owe it to ourselves to take care of them now in their 2 years.
Yes.
And to love on them at a level. I told Mommy, I'm just gonna make sure however many more days you have left, whether it's 6 hours, 6 days, 6 months, or 6 years, whatever God is saying, we're gonna spend the rest of this time living until we die. And that's been my mantra since mom when she got this last diagnosis, I said, okay, we're going to live until we die. And that's been my mantra since. And so now she's saying stuff like, I want to get up. Since she's been home in hospice, she was in that bed. She said, I need y'all to get me up out this bed. We got her up. She wanted to sit in her chair. Yesterday I said, Mom, you want to watch MSNBC? She said, well, what's going on MSNBC? I said, well, you want to watch the Senate debate? They're talking about the stimulus. She said, yeah, because I need my stimulus check. And then last night she asked about it again. And so my husband said, she's not leaving until she get that check. Right. So it's a part of our journey. It's a part of owning our story, right?
Yes.
It's owning our story. So Jeanne, you talked about there was a point where you became more intentional. You had the modeling from mom, right? Yeah. And then there was a point where you became more intentional. I know for me, it was 20 years ago. I started being more intentional on my 37th birthday when I felt like I was about to die. And my husband asked me, what did I want for my birthday? And I said, a treadmill. Who asked for a treadmill on their birthday, right? I did, because I just knew that I wasn't going to make it. And then, of course, shortly after that, I was diagnosed with Graves' disease, which is a hyperthyroid condition that I've had to manage over these past 20 years. And so over these years, and I'm not nowhere near, I didn't start, people look at me today and they think I've always been doing the stuff they see me doing now with the working out and the eating meatless meals and things, but I had to grow to this, right, over these past 20 years. But there was a, as they call, in leadership development or even in theological circles, a crisis moment. So I had a Damascus Road experience where I literally saw my life flash before me. And the Lord said to me, if you don't take better care of yourself for where I'm trying to take you, you won't make it. You won't make it. And I saw somebody else married to my husband. I saw somebody else raising my kids. And I was like, the devil is a liar. No, I'm going to live and not die and declare the works of the Lord. Right?
Yes.
Well, talk to us about that turning point for you. What was that place for you where you became more intentional?
Okay. When it came to things like working out, I was always an avid worker-outer, if that's a word. I was an junior high and high school.
Okay, you were athletic?
Yeah, I played sports in junior high and high school.
Let me guess, basketball.
That was one of them, in volleyball. My favorite. And here's the truth, Toni. I wasn't that good. So by my senior year, I stopped. All my friends, they were ballers. And I said, I think I better focus on my academics and get into college somewhere on a scholarship. But I'm always active. I ran track also. And in my first physical ed class in undergrad, freshman year, first year, it was called Fitness for a Lifetime. And I mean, who at 18 takes Fitness for a Lifetime as a class? Wow. I've always been physically fit. Always. My brother was an athlete. It just kind of, the small town we grew up in, you just stay fit. For whatever reason, I won't even be able to tell you the exact reason, but in my master's program, my first master's program, so I was 24, I was reading, whatever I did, I took red meats and pork out in my early 20s. So I adjusted my diet. I wouldn't have called this self-care or wellness. I think I knew that of my mother's siblings, 7 of the 9 of them had diabetes and high blood pressure. I'd read somewhere about how pork and beef digest differently in your system. Yeah. It was a process. I'd make up my mind in school. I'd come home, girl, for 4th of July and those ribs. And don't come home for Christmas with the honey baked ham, right? I would fall off the wagon every time I got home until
you was sin, and then you had to come and repent.
Lord, forgive me. And so then at some point, though, I got it, and I had, it came out of my diet. And so I was doing those things, but I was one of those, it wasn't a physical wake-up call for me because I'd always been physically fit. For me Toni. It was more, I carry stress. I'm a type A. I call myself type double A. My family always says I'm high strung. You know, I'm a high achiever. And what was happening for me is the kind of work I was in, eating at a very early age, doing, you know, we don't call it bivocational now, but back in the day, you know, staying active in ministry in my local churches and, you know, preaching and then running, you know, inside of companies or running my own company. I was at some point an academic, and I remember getting so stretched in the academy that and there was another friend of mine, we would talk about it. And I ended up just feeling led to, at some point, I needed to leave the academy. I started my own business, but it gave me the opportunity to go to seminary. I had my doctorate before I had a seminary degree, even though I was called into ministry. You know, I come from that tradition that wasn't so high on seminaries. Not that I wasn't. I just had never been afforded the opportunity. It didn't make it. I made up in my mind. I lived in Hyde Park in Chicago. It has 6 or 7 different seminaries. And when I left that academic role, I said, I'm going to seminary. And it was in seminary, so it became a theological issue for me. My stress, my way I lived my life. And one of the first things I learned there was Sabbath keeping. So now I left this kind of, you know, high toxic, and it's a long story. I'm going to write about it one day in my books. I was at a white evangelical Christian university. They had hired a handful of us Blacks, and they were trying to diversify. But any woman of color in academia, especially 20-something years ago, knows that, my God, the load, you're doing double and triple duty often, in addition to teaching. I was a professor, I was still tenure track, but it just became too much. So by the time I got to seminary, the pace has changed. I still had to work, but that's where I started my own business to be able to help pay for it. And the Lord blessed, I was on full fellowship. And I try to now pay it forward. And I've helped many people with their academic career, because I was blessed to not pay for much of my education. But what I got out of that program, the first thing I learned was the idea of Sabbath keeping. That was so novel for me that I began to practice it. Because I was no longer, you know, working either a 9 to 5 or having to drive up to my university. I had client work, but it was more flexible. I did lots more walks. I was still doing my treadmill elliptical because I lived in Hyde Park on the lakefront. I would cycle. One time I cycled from my house in Hyde Park all the way up to Northwestern University.
Now that's a hike.
So Chicago. Round was 50 miles.
I'm from Chicago. Yes, I know.
That was 50 miles. So I was always, you know, and what I learned in seminary as part of the Sabbath keeping, it was the slower walks. It was when fall came, go over to the lakefront, but you don't have to run, walk and kick yourself. Right? It was slowing the pace. It was me learning to rest, because I was so driven, and I come from a family of drivenness, you know, that I had to learn. I might stay up to 2 and 3 in the morning getting a project done. I didn't know when to stop. I literally had to learn these, and then since did a lot of reading, more authors, began to bring more practices in, like rhythms, solitude, silence. And around the same time, one of my good girlfriends who's an author now, I was writing my book. She was actually writing her D-Min project. She took me out to a former convent that was now a retreat center. And we took a writing retreat. Girl, after that, I would do an annual retreat, writing just alone time at this particular retreat center. They have since closed it. Before I got married, I was old. Before I got married, I let my husband know I need lots of kind of solitude time now. I'm an extrovert, prefer extroversion, as they would say, with the Myers-Briggs and things of that nature. But as I got older and developed practices, my own time, my solitude, my quiet, going within. That is, so for me, what I learned is the intentionality became a theological and ministry principle for me. And to get, to get a date, I entered seminary in 2001. So it's almost, not that we even knew each other, but it was 20 years ago also.
Yeah.
But different paths. So literally I entered seminary in 2001, was out in 2004. And in that period, studied it, developed a program for my church called, what did we call that? The journey toward wholeness. So a lot of the things I was in, and I did a pastoral care track. I did two things that really made this more intentional for me. I studied, my advisor was one of the most prominent pastoral care scholars in Chicago. I was determined I was going to study with him. He was my advisor. I took all the pastoral care classes, but I also sliced and diced leadership because I already had a doctorate. My professors really treated me as a colleague. They held me to standards they were supposed to, but they would recommend, for one of your electives, you can take independent studies and study what you want. They knew I had the study of the scholarly ability. And so if I had 3 electives, I sliced and diced leadership from a spirituality standpoint. I could. I took womanist theology. I took African-American leadership. I took, you get the point. And I was trying to really get to the crux of this leadership thing that I was already doing and had earned a doctorate in from a social science standpoint. But I was really grounding myself in a theological, and then we now have the language of, I didn't even use wellness. I used wholeness, but developed that program for the women. And to this day, continue to develop programs for the various women's ministries I'm a part of that have some wellness or wholeness component that I try to live out and help others with.
It's amazing. It's amazing how we were started on this track around the same time. And now the Lord has caused our streams to flow together along this, with this whole wellness piece and this whole self-care and Sabbath keeping. And I remember years ago, and this was before this is when I first started on the journey, before I really made it I guess before it really became really who I am. Some things our bishop says, some things we study, some things we preach by experience, and some things we preach by revelation.
Yes.
And so I did a sermon series in our church years ago called Remember the Sabbath. And teaching that sermon series changed my life. It changed, like you said, it changed the way I look at life. It changed the way I approach ministry. It changed the way I do life, slowing the pace and all of that. But as I've stayed on this journey, now it's really a part of who I am. And this whole harmonizing your life comes out of that whole thought of that whole practice, that Sabbath practice of knowing when to work and when to rest, knowing my rhythm, knowing when I'm at my best and when I'm not, learning how to say no and not feel guilty about it, learning how to, learning when, what works best for me when and knowing how to make the shifts. You know what I'm saying? All of that is a part of that harmonizing your life. And so I'm just so glad and to hear that seminary brought you into a more theological understanding. I think for me, it was courses like spiritual formation when I was working on my doctorate, classes like that. And even when I went in my classes in my DMin work, my focus was on coaching. And so even the courses that I took there were really kind of helped ground me in this thought, in this theological approach to life, with self-care, wellness. But didn't Jesus say, I came that you might have life
and have it more
abundantly. And so it's amazing. And I'll just I'm being very transparent with you right here. Last year, and I said this to my previous guest, last year when COVID shut us down from being on the road. And we talked about how, you and I talked about this offline, how we were so used to seeing each other at the conferences, the women's conferences that we would preach for. And I believe that those days may come back for us. But now it's like when it first happened, I was really lamenting and I was really grieving the loss of those appointments. And it wasn't so much it wasn't about quote unquote the honorariums, but it was about, we found that as a place of connection with our colleagues and our sister girls, our preaching colleagues. And so I grieved some of that outlet. Well, but it was right at that moment that God launched me into this podcast. So now it's like God has said, okay, you're still doing ministry.
Yes.
It just looks different.
Yes.
You're still preaching. It just looks different. It has a different face to it, a different rhythm to it, a different sound to it. And I have to tell you, having women on here like you, and I had Dr. Valerie Bridgman on in January, and I had Reverend Jennifer Watley on, and Reverend Jennifer Carter on. And what I've decided this year, every month, I'm going to have at least a woman in ministry. Last year, I had Bishop Vashti McKenzie. I had Dr. Claudette Copeland on. And I said, every month, there's going to be at least one preaching woman on this podcast, because we have to begin to see this as ministry as well.
Oh, I totally agree with you. And for me, what helped shift the perspective, because I come out of this, I'm a third generation Pentecostal, and our approach to ministry often is, ministry, church comes first, sometimes at the detriment of self and family. What else I picked up in seminary, I went to a Presbyterian seminary. So this Pentecostal, third generation Pentecostal, went to this Presbyterian seminary. But when you remember in seminary, when you get your practicum and you go at a church, because I never saw myself, I'm an executive pastor now working with my husband. And before I married him, I was on pastoral staff at my church. I didn't see my ministry going in the pastoral direction. So I did my practicum at a spiritual retreat center, people who get trained to be spiritual directors. My practicum. So for 9 months, I got trained on these spiritual direction principles and practices. I share that only to say it expanded my thinking and practices out of just my traditional. And I think what we see happening now is we're calling on all of that is diverse traditions, diverse means and mechanisms for sharing what we do. So your entire platform has broadened to this whole podcast, on social media, you're blogging, you're doing so much, and it's what people need at this point. So it's a different than we typically saw, because a lot of our ministry, again, from our tradition, Baptist, Pentecostal, just Black church, was across the pulpit or at a conference. God's expanding it. And I'm looking at some of the things I'm doing now that those spiritual direction trainers, they were speaking of that, integrating social science with theology. Let's develop these very strong self-care, wellness, and wholeness principles. That is expanded.
I'm telling you, and as a matter of fact, and I know several now, Dr. Kimberly Alexander from the Park Church, Bishop Claude Alexander's wife. She's a spiritual director. Dr. Jessica Ingram.
That's the one I ever knew was Dr.
Jessica Ingram, and so so it's good to see that we're coming full circle.
Yes.
We're coming full circle on these lines. And so, Jeanne, I want those that are listening to be able to follow you and the work that you're doing. So, those of you that are watching us on YouTube, you see her name there, Dr. Jeanne Porter-King. If you're listening, it's Jeanne with 2 N's. Porter-King, and I'm putting here Inspiring the Leader Within. That's the name of her ministry. Her website is JeannePorterKing.com. You can find her there on Facebook. You can find her at Jeanne Porter-King on IG. It's just her name, y'all, at Dr. Jeanne Porter-King on IG, and on Twitter, she is at Dr. Jeanne P. King. Okay, so follow Jeanne. And now we're on Clubhouse. And I am a part of the Black Women's Leadership Network Club with Dr. Jeanne Porter-King, and we are dropping some gems every Wednesday. Jeanne, tell them a little bit about our clubhouse meetings every Wednesday.
I sure will. The Black Women's Leadership Network is about us as women coming together to support each other, to help support the next generation coming along. Dr. Toni is going to be on
the 17th, I think.
17th. We come on every Wednesday at the lunch hour. So for those that are on the East Coast and Midwest, it's the lunch hour. We have folks who join us from the West Coast. It's their breakfast hour. We take an hour most of the time, no more than 90 minutes, and we do a quick midweek, midday break to re-energize, to connect. And Toni's going to be talking about self-care. We're going to interview her on self-care on the 17th. But we talk about issues that are prevalent and relevant to women's leadership, especially Black women's leadership. Like next week, we're going to be talking about the imposter syndrome. A lot of people,
and I can't wait. I cannot wait. That's going to be so good. I'm going to be pinging so many women into that room. I'm going to ping so many women into that room.
Yeah, it manifests differently for Black women. And one of the ahas, as I'm reading up on it, is we can't always, people who think, or people really think I'm as good as I am. Am I as good as people think I am? Oftentimes when that happens, there's something happening structurally. We got to pay attention to the places in which we lead, that because of patriarchy, racism, misogyny, or what have you, messages are sent or practices are in place that try to keep women, especially Black women, down. And we've got to watch that we don't own all of that and we don't internalize it. So we're going to look at the imposter syndrome from a slightly different perspective as it comes to Black women.
Oh, I can't wait. I can't wait. So if you're on Clubhouse, if you're not on Clubhouse, get on Clubhouse. Ask somebody to give you an invite and get in there with us. I'm a part of the group of women who co-moderate with Dr. Jeanne on Wednesdays during our lunchtime. We get together, and I'm just so grateful to be a part of this. And like I said before, we're doing ministry. It may look different than what we were doing pre-COVID. And there's some things that we were doing pre-COVID that may not ever come back. And certainly things are just going to look different post-COVID. Okay. And so we need to be prepared for those things and to be able to move in and out of those spaces. Dr. Jeanne, I am so grateful, number one, to have you as a sister, to have you as a friend, as a dialogue partner, a writing coach. Because I told you, if you help me, I'll do it. And so I appreciate you for that. Listen, follow this podcast. Those of you that are listening to us today, if you're enjoying this podcast, would you subscribe to my YouTube channel? Please do so and share these conversations with other women and let them know that they can find value in these conversations and real practical insight and wisdom that they can apply to their lives. I want you, you can also follow this podcast on Apple Podcasts, on Google Podcasts, on Spotify. You can listen to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform, or you can watch us live on YouTube. Women, join the Harmonize Your Life Self-Care Network. God has commissioned me. I really believe this is part of my assignment for this age, for this season of my life. And I assume that this will probably be kind of where God will have me for the remainder. I'm almost 58. So I believe I can be here in this space until the Lord calls me home. But let me just tell you, we have started a movement for women of color, and we are not apologetic about that. We don't mind other women being a part of that, but I want you to know that this is a safe space for women of color, for you to come where we can share our experience and share our stories and be built up, so that we can go out and be who we're supposed to be and do all the things that God has called us to do. And so we are extending that invitation to you to come and be a part of this movement, this self-care movement for women of color. Thank you again, Jeanne, for being a part of our conversation on today. I am so delighted. Do you want to say one last thing to our audience before we go?
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, Toni, and for your women that are listening. Take care of yourself, mind, body, soul, and spirit. Dr. Toni has so many great resources. We're creating a resource page on my new website where it will launch in the next 6 weeks or so. But one of the resources around wellness, I will be adding links for my folks to follow Toni, because you have really cutting edge wellness and self-care information, and we need it. So take care of yourself, slow down, but mind, body, soul, and spirit, take care of yourself, because what God has for you to do in this season, you need to be here to do it, and you need to be able to do it within this temple and do it for a long time.
Yeah. And you need to be able to do it well.
Yes.
You need to be able to do it well. That's not just proficient in your craft or your skill, but you need to be whole, spirit, soul, and body. Thank you, Jeanne. I'll see you Wednesday in Clubhouse, girl.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
I'm praying for your mom, and
I'm praying for yours as well.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay. Love you.
Love you.
Hi, this is Dr. Toni Alvarado. I am so delighted about bringing the Harmonize Your Life podcast to you. Would you do me a favor? If you are enjoying this podcast, would you email me at hello@drtonyalvarado.com? I want to hear from you. I want your feedback. I want to know if there are any other topics that you are interested in as it relates to wellness, self-care, nutrition, or just overall bringing harmony into your life. Email me, contact me at hello@drtonyalvarado.com.